I listened to Jan Markell's latest radio program, which was Be Prepared for Contagion 2025, which is about the next pandemic that Bill Gates is warning us about. Is Dr. Broggi familiar with this, and what are his thoughts?
Sure, I'm familiar with it, not just through Jan Markell, but through Gates himself. And people wonder, well, why did Bill Gates make such a pointed, definitive statement about a pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, concerning 2025. Does he know? Well, maybe he knows some things that you don't. I think it's interesting that Dr. Fauci told Trump ever before he went into office that he would have a pandemic that he would have to deal with. How did he know that? Well, maybe he knew through his interaction with his health organization that he was engaged with, where they were doing research in China. Maybe he knew that there was going to be some disease that was going to be released. I don't know. We don't know for certain why Bill Gates can speak with such authority. We do know that Dr. Fauci became an extremely wealthy man off of this whole pandemic, as did many of the pharmaceutical companies. They went from, hundreds of millions of dollars of profit into the billions of dollars. Greed drives a lot that's in our world today. And it might be that the next pandemic that could be released would be driven by greed. We obviously know that ultimately, because the scripture speaks of a one world government, that one of the advantages to the pandemic, as the World Health Organization admitted, they were able to accomplish more through the pandemic than they had in the prior 20 years in terms of world unity. Of course, they were found out, and a lot of people think, they were wicked people and just driving this ship to fulfill their agenda. So we do know that one world government is coming. Certainly, fear drives people together. And so if the government says, hey, your kids are going to die, your parents are going to die, or if I remember correctly, this next pandemic, they say, is going to affect children and not older adults. How do they know that? Well, maybe they know some things that aren't being made public. But, how does Bill Gates, I read the same thing that you read. I haven't listened to Jan on this, but I've read the same things that Gates said. How does he know that little children are going to die from this next pandemic? Who knows? Maybe he knows some things that we don't know, and maybe he's financially, invested in these things. So we can't worry about these things. These things could drive you crazy. Again, Psalm 139, the days that were written even before there was yet one were recorded in our book. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't take precautions and that we shouldn't ready our family as best we are able to prepare for such a thing. What if there is a lockdown? When we had one of the guys that we supported in China come to our church during the pandemic, and he described what took place in China. He said they literally went and bolted the doors, and people could not get out of the building. They could not get out of their apartments. I mean, you talk about control. And you had people screaming from their balconies that they're hungry, that they needed food, and it was just beyond belief. But they exercised a control factor. And there's no telling what the next pandemic will bring. They told us to stay in our homes. I was out cutting my grass every day, and not every day, but, when it needed it, and working in the yard. And, people, but it was funny because you'd walk around the neighborhood and just everybody was indoors at first, like they were in gross panic. What am I in panic over? The worst that can happen to me as a believer is I die and go home to be with Jesus. That's the worst that can happen, and that's not a bad alternative.
Dr. Carl Broggi answers your questions about the Bible and living the Christian life Tuesday mornings at 11 on The Light, 88.7 FM, and online around the world at wagp.net.